Something that I've always been fascinated about in regards to the Persona series is the amount of supplementary material on offer. A franchise isn't successful just because it has a bunch of games and spin-offs. The true success of a brand is whether or not it's able to branch out into other forms of media, and this is something that the Persona series is rather infamous for. You know that meme where people say that Persona fans don't play their own games? With the amount of adaptations this series has gotten over the years, I can fully see why. Without a doubt, the most popular non-video game Persona product are the Persona 4 animes. If you have more than a surface level interest in Persona, then you've definitely heard of these by now. The Persona animes are responsible for some of the more well-known inside jokes within the community, on top of being some pretty alright watches overall. At least the Persona 4 anime is. The Persona 3 and 5 ones are a bit more of a mixed bag if you were to ask me, but for different reasons. The Persona 3 movies are a good way to experience the core story, but because of the theatrical format, a lot of the smaller moments needed to be cut out, and part of what makes Persona 3 so special are those more quiet moments. These films aren't bad, but they aren't something that I bothered to watch after the first two movies. The Persona 5 anime, on the other hand, suffers from a lack of budget, and is just sort of a paint-by-numbers adaptation overall. But this is just scratching the surface because, trust me, there's plenty more where that came from. If you were to peel back this adaptation layer ever so slightly, then you'd be flooded with a seemingly never-ending series of tie-ins and adaptations, including but not limited to stage plays, drama CDs, and of course, manga. And I know you're probably thinking, what's the point of all this? I mean, if I just wanted to experience the story, then that's what the games are for, right? While I would always recommend everyone play the games for their first time experiencing the story, I also think that every fan should also try their hand at reading some of these manga tie-ins at some point. I've always been captivated by the idea of different authors providing their own take on the source material, because it provides some interesting insight on how other people perceive these games and our favorite characters. The manga based off of Persona 4 is a pretty good example of this. The P4 manga puts a large emphasis on Yosuke's character, even going as far as to basically adapt the Naoki Konishi social link with him as the protagonist, which makes for an interesting take on that storyline and gives his character more agency in the main narrative. I find stuff like this very interesting, since it shows that the minds behind these adaptations have their own ideas on what they'd like to change in the story given the chance to, but it's not in a disrespectful way. It still keeps the core of what fans enjoy about these stories, but with enough creative liberties so the author can leave their own mark on the legacy. While the Persona 4 manga is worthy of its own video, it's not what we're going to be focusing on today. Rather, I wanted to shift focus to the game's successor, Persona 5. I've been in a bit of a P5 kick lately due to some other projects I've been working on, so I figured that now is as good a time as any to consume some of the lesser discussed content surrounding this game. It was this line of thinking that led me to checking out Persona 5 Mementos Mission, a manga original story written and illustrated by Rokuro Saito. Now this manga has been on my radar for years at this point, but I've just never got around to reading it until recently. And you know what? I actually liked it quite a bit. So for today's video, I'm going to do a quick review of this manga and give you some reasons as to why you should check it out yourself. I get that this is a pretty different style from my usual video, but hey, there's nothing wrong with experimenting. But first, I'd like to tell you about today's sponsor, Persona 5 Tactica. Persona 5 Tactica is the latest entry in the long-running Persona franchise. The game's story sees everyone's favorite phantom thieves suddenly finding themselves transported to a mysterious world, where they're forced to fight back against the oppressive Legionnaires. Team up with familiar faces and brand new allies in intense and strategic turn-based battles. Every playable character is equipped with unique skill sets to set each other apart, but the game also offers plenty of customization thanks to sub-personas and character skill trees. And since you can have any 3 characters out on the field at once, the possibility of play is near limitless. The key to success in Persona 5 Tactica lies in how you're able to take advantage of everyone's unique abilities in combat, while also having proper positioning as to not leave yourself out in the open. This is especially important, since if you're too careless, the tide of battle can easily shift, so you're always encouraged to thoroughly plan ahead. This is just scratching the surface as to what the game has to offer, so what are you waiting for? Persona 5 Tactica is available right now for PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and PC. So if you're looking to reunite with the Phantom Thieves, click the link below to get started. Once again, huge thanks to Atlas for sponsoring today's video. Something that we should get out of the way is that Mementos Mission is a non-canon side story to the original Persona 5. This means that you should only expect stuff featured in the original game to be referenced, so if you're looking forward to seeing Kasumi or Maruki in this story, then sorry to say, it doesn't happen. Also, if you're expecting any big character revelations from this manga, you're not getting any. As the name would imply, Persona 5 Mementos Mission is a short, low-scale story that focuses on the daily activities of the Phantom Thieves. It's definitely a for-the-fans story, and as such, there's the expectation here that you've already played the original game before reading this, and for the sake of keeping things brief, I will too. The premise for this story is pretty simple. Mementos Mission takes place sometime after the Okumura Palace, but before the Sai arc begins. The main meat of this story follows the Phantom Thieves and their journey to discover who poisoned the producer of a model agency. The current suspect in the crime is An's co-worker and rival Mika. However, since the Phantom Thieves know that she's innocent, they work tirelessly to catch the true culprit and understand the motives behind their actions. But at the same time as all this, they're on the lookout for the fabled Twin Fang Killer, a serial killer who only targets other criminals. This is the main focus of Mementos Mission, and while this story isn't quite a murder mystery, it's definitely an intriguing plot. The goals of the Phantom Thieves initially start off as very black and white. They want to catch whoever attempted to murder the producer, but as events unfold, the situation becomes a bit more morally gray. To give some slight spoilers here, we learn that the producer in question was kind of a shitty guy. He took advantage of his position of power to get sexual favors from his models, essentially forcing them into prostitution, and all of this culminates in one of them committing suicide. There's a short conversation between the Phantom Thieves as to whether or not this guy deserved what happened to him because of his actions. Akechi does make an appearance in this story, and he ends up bringing up the parallels between the Phantom Thieves and the Twin Fanged Killer. Mementos Mission tackles the idea of acting outside of the law, and whether or not those good intentions should actually be considered morally righteous, or if they should be tried as criminals too. It's definitely not the most nuanced conversation, but this is an idea that was present in the original game, so it was nice seeing it featured here. One of my favorite aspects of Mementos Mission was just seeing Rokuro Saito's take on Persona 5's characters and setting. It's no secret that I take issue with the way Persona characters are represented outside of their original games, so I didn't have a whole lot of expectations going into this one. However, I ended up coming out of this one pleasantly surprised. The author has a pretty clear grasp on the Phantom Thieves and how their dynamic should be. I really like his interpretation of Makoto especially. Her hyper-serious attitude and even the most casual situations got a good laugh out of me. But if I'm gonna be talking about characterization in this manga, then there's no way I can avoid talking about Joker. Saito's take on the protagonist is damn near perfect, and almost completely captures the Persona 5 experience in his characterization. Joker in this manga is portrayed as someone who has taken way too much on at once. He lives a very chaotic and hectic life, and while he tries his hardest to keep everything tied together, he often overworks himself to the point of collapsing. In a way, this disorganization reminds me of my first time playing Persona 5, where it just felt as though I didn't have enough time to see and do everything that I wanted to. But unlike me, this Joker actually finished EY's confidant. Something that I also want to give credit to is just how well certain gameplay aspects of P5 are represented in this manga, and how they're used to enhance the story trying to be told. I was a little worried when I saw certain confidant scenes were being adapted, because I wasn't sure if it was done to service the story being told, or if it was for the sake of fan service. I eventually warmed up to the idea when the author used them as a way to advance the story he was trying to tell. Like, yeah, it makes sense that EY has shady connections, so once his sub-story comes to a close, they could use that as a natural jumping off point. But with that said, I think I would have preferred it if we got new original content with these side characters instead. At first, this does seem to be the case with Takemi, but then for EY and Chihaya, their plots are lifted straight from the game. It makes sense, I suppose, but being forced to go through almost the entirety of EY's confidant again felt a little too much like a retread, with the payoff being reserved exclusively for the final chapter. Not to say that there's anything wrong with fan service, or that there isn't any good fan service in this manga, but this section just sort of stood out to me. There isn't a whole lot for me to complain about with this one. It's a short and sweet story that I'd say is a must-read for any Persona 5 fans looking to get more out of these characters. It's only 18 chapters long, so you can knock it out in a few hours. The only minor criticism I have is that there's surprisingly very little action in this manga. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind having a smaller scale story that focuses on the character, but for how much build-up there is for the final confrontation, to see it settle in a pretty quick manner felt a little anticlimactic for me. I only say this because this author author also made the Persona 4 Arena Ultimax adaptation prior to this, so it's clear that he has experience with fight scenes. This doesn't ruin the story or anything, but a little more Persona fights would have been appreciated. I just think it's funny that for a story called Mementos Mission, there is very little of Mementos itself. This was honestly a fun time, and I hope that Rokuro Saito's work becomes a bit more recognized within the fanbase one of these days. If any of you watching end up reading this for yourself and are itching for more of his work, then I also recommend you check out the Persona 5 anthology comic published back in 2018, since the first installment was also written and illustrated by him. There's also the Ultimax manga that I mentioned earlier that you should check out once you're done with his P5 stuff. Now I know what you're thinking. Will I ever cover any of the other Persona mangas on this channel? Maybe at some point. It really just depends on how well this video turns out. I know that there are a few that I definitely want to talk about, but I don't have any plans at the moment. Until then, thank you all so much for watching, and an extra special thanks to all of my channel supporters.